It's great that you can be with us as we share some wonderful insights and conversations, discussions around creating a culture of partnerships with parents. This webinar is part of a series of webinars that KidsMatter Early Childhood has been providing to assist us to grow our understanding of early childhood mental health and wellbeing, and also to support those services who have registered as an official KidsMatter service to assist your implementation of our KidsMatter framework. Today we're using the chat box, and before we start, we asked a question about working in partnerships. I can see that we've already received some great feedback and some wonderful responses. We'll be referring back to these learnings as the webinar progresses. You can minimise or expand this chat box by clicking on the triangle on the right-hand side. I'd like to remind everybody who's signed up to participate in this webinar that you'll receive a certificate. At the end of the webinar, you'll have opportunity to fill in a feedback form, and if you are meeting as a group, you'll be able to fill in the names of all those who are attending so that everybody can receive a certificate. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet today. I acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. The Kulin Nation is an alliance of 5 Indigenous Australian tribes in Victoria, and I pay my respects to their elders, both past, present and future, who have taught us and continue to teach us about what it means to value land and spaces, resources, stories, spirituality, and how to belong to a tribe or a clan called family. Today it's my privilege to introduce our 2 guest presenters for the webinar. I'd like to welcome Penny Anderson, one of our KidsMatter Early Childhood facilitators, and Paul Pritchard, the co-manager of training and development at the Centre for Community Child Health at the Royal Children's Hospital here in Victoria. So let's welcome Paul and Penny.
Hi everyone.
And can we get Paul up on screen too?
Hello, how are you?
Hi.
Hi and welcome. Now I'm going to hand over to Penny. Thanks, Penny.
Right. Thank you very much, Linda, and welcome everybody. Just to start with, I'd like to acknowledge that we know that many early childhood educators already connect with parents in positive ways. And you're probably enrolled in this webinar because you're interested in becoming even better at doing this. So Paul and I have some take-home messages to discuss with, which we hope will give you some food for thought and some ideas for action. But to start with, I'd like to just share a story from my background. I began my education career in 1962 in a 1-teacher preschool, working with children from 3 to 5 years in a small forestry town in the mountains of Tasmania. 25 children attended 5 mornings a week and 20 children 3 afternoons a week. And I had no teacher assistant. So I realised very quickly that I needed parent help. And from then on, I had parents working alongside me when I was teaching, and I really valued their contribution despite occasional challenges. However, I'm now much more aware of how important such partnerships are, and I think I'd value them even more. This experience began my career-long interest in the contribution of parents to children's learning and development. So, as you can see on the screen, our take-home messages that we hope that you will take away from this webinar are that partnerships are very important for mental health and wellbeing, that the KidsMatter framework provides support for early childhood educators in working with parents and carers, and we need to question how well we engage all parents in our services and schools. And we know that we can strengthen our partnerships with families. So let us explain. Linda, the slide is not responding to me. Right, well, let's just think about the KidsMatter framework and partnerships. I'm a state facilitator for the implementation of the KidsMatter Early Childhood Framework. And KidsMatter Early Childhood is a mental health project which focuses on promotion, prevention and early intervention in relation to the mental health and wellbeing of young children and their families. KidsMatter also includes resources for primary schools, families and health and community personnel, and links closely with Mind Matters in secondary schools. So this gives a seamless progression until the end of schooling. I'm working with KidsMatter because I believe mental health is such an important issue in our community, and early childhood educators are in an excellent position to make a difference. For example, the way in which they connect with parents and how they support parenting. So how does KidsMatter connect with the topic we are focusing on? On the screen is a diagram of the KidsMatter framework. The 4 components were decided upon after a thorough analysis of the evidence available in the field. So there on the screen you can see the red circle for component 1, creating a sense of community, which we think is a foundation for the framework. Glenda, my screen is not responding.
I'll just need you to click on the screen with your mouse and then your arrow keys should work again.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Right, component 2, which is the yellow circle you can see, that focuses on developing children's social and emotional skills, and a lot of interesting content in there. Component 3 is about working with parents and carers. And then component 4 is helping children who are experiencing mental health difficulties. So those 4 components together provide a really solid framework for enabling early childhood educators to promote, prevent and intervene early in supporting the mental health and wellbeing of children. So let's go back to component 3, working with parents and carers, and look a little bit more closely at this component. This was chosen as one of the 4 key components because the research has shown the positive impact on mental health of connections between educators and families. The term carers is included in the title because we know that many young children are being cared for by people other than their parents. Parents means both mothers and fathers. So the topics explored in this component are a culture of partnership, support for parenting, communication and connecting families together. So on the KidsMatter website you'll find videos and suggestions for professional learning in relation to each of those topics, together with a wide range of information resources. So what are the component 3 goals? Well, we hope that educators who participate in KidsMatter and do component 3 will value and acknowledge different perspectives that families bring with them, and that also they'll be able to build a sense of trust and respect and develop a deep understanding of each child and share this with their family. We also hope that they'll strengthen relationships and create a positive sense of community for all members of the service or school. Opportunities for sharing information and decision making will be improved, and we hope that everyone will act to ensure that everybody in the service or early childhood part of the school feels supported and connected. The framework helps early childhood educators to recognise and celebrate what they are already doing well, to know what actions to take to improve their practice, and in today's context when there are so many choices, to have a sound understanding of what is most worth spending time on if you want to make a difference to mental health. So we know that there are a number of risk and protective factors which influence mental health and wellbeing in early childhood. The impact of these factors can vary depending on a child's temperament and circumstances, and we know that many are family related. KidsMatter identifies these factors and focuses on increasing the protective factors so that the children are more able to deal with the ups and downs of everyday life. Research evidence shows that collaborative partnerships between educators and families is a strong mental health protective factor, And these partnerships are strengthened even more if early childhood services and schools also provide support for parenting in a way that is accessible for all families. For example, one of our services in KidsMatter in the Kimberley area adapted any information that went out to parents by using symbols and local language and working out different ways to get those surveys to parents and to get them back again. So they adapted to that local need. So we also hope that they'll establish effective communication between educators and all families, and very importantly, to build connections between families so that they can support each other. So in this diagram, we'll show some of the risks and the protections in relation to a balance scale, which you'll see at the bottom. The risks are those factors on the left which we can probably have little impact on, although there are other risk factors which we can affect. But what we can do is we can increase the factors on the right-hand side of the scale in order to reduce the effect of the factors on the left-hand side. And that's our aim in KidsMatter, is to increase those protective factors. The partnerships between educators and families increase all the protective factors that are shown on the right-hand side of the scale. So what have partnerships got to do with mental health and well-being? So let's consider the connections between partnerships and mental health and well-being. We'll start with the baby's early relationships with a parent, which develops through things like physical touch, making eye contact, cooing, babbling. And this starts what's called the serve and return process, which is often initiated by the baby. And this establishes the pathways, the learning pathways and connections in the brain. And this is how the brain learns, and it continues to learn. It all starts with relationships. So relationships are central to all learning. So if we know that research has confirmed this and that the emotions that accompany them are so important, how does this knowledge help us to think about partnerships? Well, we know that quality relationships lead to quality learning, and so that we should not underestimate the impact of those quality relationships. And we know that children learn so much from what they experience, see, hear and feel. Many years ago, I read a book called The Students Are Watching by Ted Sizer about the considerable impact on secondary students of adult behaviour, both towards students and to each other. It made a great impression on me, and I thought at the time that this was probably even more significant in early childhood when foundations are being established. If research clearly shows us that children learn by watching, then we need to model our values at all times. The way we treat each other, the way we treat them, the way we speak to each other, lots of other aspects. So, collaborative partnerships. The positive relationships with families are enhanced by collaborative partnerships. So when children see these partnerships in action, this affects their well-being in a positive way. So we're next going to think about what does this look like in action. And we can see our figures on the screen moving towards each other and becoming more connected. So what we're going to ask you to do now is to think about the question that you can see on the screen. So what are collaborative partnerships between families and early childhood educators like in practice? We can use that term collaborative partnerships, and really we don't know exactly what we're all meaning by what we're saying with that. So what do they look like, sound like, feel like? So we're inviting you to click on the blue arrow there that you can see on the screen, and that will take you to the KidsMatter website, and there's a shared thinking blog that we've begun about answers to that question. And there are some responses there already, so if you click on the arrow and go to that, you will see that some people have already put in ideas about their responses to that question. And I invite you now to all have a go if you'd like to, and go in there, have a look at what's been said. If you've got time, you can add a few of your own words, although the time is a little bit limited. And it's a good way to actually introduce those who don't know to the Shared Thinking blog on the KidsMatter site, because there are lots of useful resources in that area, including those about working with parents and carers. And it's something which we're adding to all the time, so it's a really interesting thing to keep visiting. So I'll give you a little moment to have a look if you'd like to, and go in and add your own comment. But you're free to go back to this at any time later and add your comments. And when you receive the PDF of the presentation after the webinar, you'll be able to connect using that link, which will take you to the blog, and you'll be able to add your comments. We'd really like to hear what you think and invite you to add to that discussion. And so while you're just having a quick look now, I'll invite Janelle to say whether there's any comments or things in the chat that she's noticed. Janelle?
Yes, hi Penny. I just noticed Rosie G's comment about the temperament, difficult temperament of, I'm just trying to find it again, difficult temperament of parents and carers or children, and they certainly can be risk factors for in the risk and protective factor framework. Either one or both can be a risk factor in the scheme of things, but it could also be one risk factor amongst a whole bunch of other risk factors too, Rosie. I hope that answers your query. And that was really the only comment that's come up, Penny. People are having trouble getting into the Shared Thinking blog, but there is a link in the chat that will take you there now.
Oh, okay. Right.
I'm hoping that will work for people.
Good.
And also, as you're talking, Penny, I'm putting some links in the chat to some of our resources, so people can click on those and get the resources straight away if they'd like.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I think we probably need to leave that blog connection now. I'm sorry those people who couldn't get in, but as I said, you will be able to get in after the webinar and add your comments and ideas, and we'd really like to hear from you. So we'd like to move on now to think about what is a collaborative partnership. What are we talking about when we're saying that? So start by thinking about the important partnerships in your life. When you're in a partnership, which you could describe as collaborative, you accept each other, you trust each other, you have a commitment to each other. And collaboration is based on good communication, respectful relationships, in which each person's unique perspectives and contributions are valued and acknowledged, and decision-making is shared. It's easy to use this term, collaborative partnership, but how easy is it to put into practice? So are there differences between involvement and partnership? We often talk about parent involvement. Does that mean partnership? Or is partnership something deeper? So why use the term collaborative? What do we mean by that? And what are the characteristics of collaborative partnerships? What are the things you currently do that you think promote collaborative partnerships? And what actions do you think you could take to improve? How ready are you to, for example, to include parents in shared decision-making, especially those important decisions? And how much do you value the parenting knowledge that families bring to the partnership? So what do collaborative partnerships look like in action in early childhood services and schools, to go back to our blog question? And remember to go back and add your ideas to that blog. So KidsMatter helps you to think about and talk about challenging questions like this and includes suggestions for enhancing partnerships with families. So now we're going to hear ideas from a parent, an educator and a couple of experts. And Janelle, our ACT KidsMatter facilitator, is going to read these for us.
Thanks, Penny. The first comment I have is from a parent called Michelle, and she says, things that I think develop positive relationships between educators and parents are things like trust. If you don't trust the educators to provide the services your child needs, then it's not going to work. The trust needs to go both ways. We need to communicate what's happening and be on the same page, so there's always a smooth transition between home and the service. Very wise words from Michelle. And now here is a comment from Anne, who's an early childhood consultant, and hopefully she looks familiar to some people. When children can witness their family and educators laughing together, being relaxed together and enjoying each other's company, that really does help build the child's sense of security and helps build a relationship between the child and the educator. And now we have a comment from a director called Melanie. When you know families really, really well, you can tell that they feel welcome in your environment. They're really forthcoming with interaction and giving you suggestions and ideas and really becoming engaged and involved in your program. And the last comment is from Robin, the lovely Robin Dolby, the clinical psychologist. I think when you respect families, you appreciate how vulnerable they are. They're vulnerable in the sense that they're bringing their most precious things in their life for you to be responsible for big periods of the day. What supports them to feel welcome and at ease is that there's a transparency of communication between them and the educator.
Thanks, Janelle. I think it is helpful to hear what others think, and we're looking forward to hearing your comments and reading them on our blog. So when we hear comments from others, it helps us to reflect on what actions we might take, and in particular, how we might respond to parents who are experiencing challenges and need support. So how well do you know all your families, as Mel mentioned? And what words or phrases might they say to you that demonstrate they are under pressure and need support? And how might you respond most usefully? Parents who have concerns about their child need to feel valued, safe and reassured, but they also need to have reliable, honest information shared with them and in an empathetic way. KidsMatter has some tools available to assist, like the Discussing Concerns flowchart in the KidsMatter framework. And there is a practice guide for working with families pre-birth to 8 years, produced with the Standing Council on School Education and Early Childhood, and that has many helpful suggestions, including avoiding factors which get in the way of open and honest discussions. You'll be sent the details of these resources after the webinar. So what actions can we take? There are available resources. There's lots of suggestions and strategies, many resources, and we've identified some important ones in the handout which you'll get after the webinar. But I believe there are some key ideas that can guide our practice. And the first one is that we need to start with positive beliefs about families. Janice Keyser in her book From Parents to Partners and Marg Wally in her book Involving Parents in Children's Learning emphasise this point really strongly. Most parents want the best for their children, but some need more support and others need assistance at some stage. Many parents are well-intentioned and trying to do the right thing by their children, but many have underlying guilt about whether they are doing enough of that right thing. And I wonder how much does this contribute to child anxiety. A strengths-based approach, which starts by identifying what parents are doing well, is helpful. We need to build protective factors into our practice, be sensitive to diversity, and accept that families will engage at different levels and in different ways, and sometimes not at all. I think it helps for staff to talk together about their understandings, about terms like partnership and collaboration, and build a shared meaning amongst all the staff. They need also to help we need to help them to view the service through the eyes of a parent and recognise that when parents can see themselves in the space, they're more likely to feel connected. It's also important to create a welcoming environment and to spend time with families, make time to stop and listen, although I know time is so precious, and to look at the environment with fresh eyes and seek the views of others about how welcoming it is and whether, for example, there is anywhere to sit comfortably and watch if that's what's needed. Have fun with families, and remember that the first feelings that families have when they walk into a service will determine how they begin to build relationships with staff. We need to make sure that we've got good communication skills and listen well to families. And KidsMatter has several tools to help you do this, like the e-learning resource, Connecting with Families, Conversations That Make a Difference, which includes a demonstration of the tool Stop, Reflect, Act. We also need to share knowledge and concerns and establish that two-way open and honest sharing, particularly when there are concerns. For example, you can use the KidsMatter Beatles observation and reflection chart to document concerns in a concise and clear way and share this with parents, while at the same time acknowledging their knowledge and expertise about their child. Such sharing helps to communicate to parents that educators care about and observe their child carefully and want to work jointly with them in order to come up with solutions that are really helpful for the well-being of their child. You will get a link to that Beatles chart. We need to also include parents in decision-making and seek the input of families and use any means available to help parents and carers feel like their contribution is important, valued and needed. For example, one of the pilot services, when thinking about how to create a greater sense of community, surveyed educators and families to build a more accurate picture of strengths and areas that needed more focus. And jointly, they developed goals and an action plan, which included involving children and families in making decisions about the centre's outdoor environment and sustainable practice. And that action really established a very strong foundation and connection with parents from then on. Okay, so let's think about any links with the EYLF and the NQS. So the EYLF emphasises partnerships between early childhood services, families and community, and this is clear on page 12 of the framework. And the National Quality Standard, Quality Area 6, identifies the elements of collaborative partnerships with parents. So people are already thinking about this in the way you respond to those. So what does KidsMatter contribute that's extra to that? Well, what KidsMatter does is focus on the significance of partnerships to mental health and wellbeing. So it brings a specific mental health lens to assist educators to examine their thinking and direct their planning. And because any goals decided upon for KidsMatter will fit well into a quality improvement plan, this is not an add-on or extra, but a way of going deeper and focusing more on aspects of thinking and planning, which particularly affect the mental health and wellbeing of children, families and staff. So let's now just turn our minds to what gets in the way of being able to build these effective partnerships. Well, the first thing is that effective partnerships depend upon engagement, and Paul's going to talk a lot more about that later. How often do we reflect on the way we interact with parents? Do we ask ourselves the hard questions about sharing difficult information and meeting the needs of all families? How well do we engage with all our families? Do we tend to think of those who are easiest to reach when we're talking about how we involve our families? Do we sometimes fall into the trap of us and them thinking or blaming families for children's difficulties? Janice Keyser, in her book From Parents to Partners, gives a great example of not letting prejudgment of someone get in the way. So how do we know what parents think and need? How do we find out? Do we make assumptions about what parents believe and want and how they might be feeling? Do we think to ourselves, oh, they aren't interested, or they're too busy, or they just leave it up to us because we know what we're doing? So whose responsibility is it to build collaborative partnerships? I believe that because we know how important partnerships and connectedness is for mental health and well-being, that we need to make every effort to work out ways in which to build those partnerships and to meet any challenges which might get in the way, and to be as creative as possible in doing that. So we're very fortunate today that Paul Pritchett is able to join us to talk about parent engagement, particularly with those parents who find it hard to engage with our early childhood services and schools. I'm grateful that he's been able to give up his time to talk to us about the significant research he has been doing in this area. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you so much, Penny, and it's just delightful to be here with you all. What a wonderful medium where we can exchange ideas across the internet and be sitting at our desks or in our homes across the nation. I'd like to thank ECA for inviting me to be here today and to share with you a few reflections and thoughts that have come up for me as I've ventured through the last 5 years of research focusing on parents as co-workers in the local system, local early childhood service system, and also through assisting the rollout of the Child and Family Centres in Tasmania, which are early childhood focused as well. By looking at the conversation that you've been having in the chat box, perhaps some of you are better qualified to be actually leading this conversation, giving the wonderful ideas that are unfolding as Penny was presenting. I'd like to start by just sharing with you what I believe perhaps it's not a very strengths-based way of approaching this, but to start by sharing with you what I believe and my colleagues that I've worked with to be some of the barriers to parent engagement. Firstly, this notion of individual resistance. It's not unusual for us to encounter practitioners who actually aren't quite sure or are a little frightened about engaging with parents, especially where parents have a bit of an axe to grind with the service. So as I share my thoughts and ideas with you, can I ask you to don't just think about the families that come every day who keep the turnstile turning, but let's actually let's challenge ourselves to think about who are the families we actually aren't engaging. And why not? Because we know that, in fact, 80% of Australian children are doing okay, or they're going to do okay. About 20% aren't doing so well. And it's those 20% more often than not that we're not engaging with very effectively. So individual resistance of the worker or of the parent themselves. A clash of practice frameworks. Think about the notion of you or I or our colleagues deciding that actually we want to wrap ourselves around a strength-based practice where we focus on the strengths of families. And families spend time with us in the morning. We're very much strengths-focused. We're working hard on being strengths-focused. And then a family goes away to another local service, let's say the GP or some other early childhood service, and they get treated in a way that conflicts with what they experience from you or I. This actually is inconsistent and sends an odd message to families who are suspicious of the system to start off with. So it highlights for us actually that we do need to coordinate our practice frameworks across disciplines and services. Lack of local understanding from parents and community members in regards to our intent across services to work in a more collaborative way with them. So we can't just get together as services and say we want to work more collaboratively with parents. We actually need to find effective ways of communicating this desire, especially to those families who came once and chose not to come back again. Lack of time and lack of patience is a big one. Many of us would have heard our colleagues or maybe ourselves in the past saying, we really are time poor. We haven't got the time and energy to give to working in a way that attracts a group of parents that we're actually not engaging with at the moment. My question to all of us is then how do we advocate for the resources and for the policy change and for the levers to be pulled in order for us to actually have the time. It is a resource issue. And I'd really like you to remember that I'm not coming here as an expert. I recoil at the word expert. I'm not coming here to say, you need to change, you need to do this, but rather, how can we advocate as things evolve and we're challenged by policymakers and bureaucrats and politicians to change the way we work and be more engaging and be collaborative? How can we advocate for adequate resources in order to do that more effectively? The fact that sometimes we're forced to work within structures and policy settings that actually are risk averse and that inhibit our frontline workers' practice and how they actually go about innovating and working in different ways with people who have chosen not to engage with us. Behaviours and language within our services that sometimes actually get in the way. And in particular, I invite you to think about the notion of power. How does power play out in our relationships, not only with the parents who come each day and with their children, but also with those people who try us once or twice and choose not to come back? How do we work hard to ensure that we demonstrate every step of the way that our intent is to actually share power with parents rather than have power over them? Regular changes in key positions. I'm not sure if this is the case for your service, but certainly my experience in working alongside government services is no sooner do you build a rapport and a relationship and a shared understanding with key senior people, then they're moved on to something else. And this can be very frustrating and inhibit an ability for early childhood services to work effectively in engaging parents. And also individual skills, knowledge, values and attitudes of the worker. Now, just as important as what you provide for children and families is actually how we do it. What are our skills, knowledge, values and attitudes that contribute to parents who are previously suspicious of our service and people like you and I being prepared to say they'll try again? Through my research in looking at a peer-led parenting program over the last 5 years, I've come to believe that our service system, that is a collective of services across a local area, actually is full of sharp edges which wound the relationship between the parent and worker. And these sharp edges can be seen in a number of different things. The organisational and practitioner behaviours, as I said before, the structure and inflexibility of services and what we have to work within, those restraints that we as workers find difficult. Environments can provide sharp edges as well. Environments that communicate to parents, actually, you're not very important. We don't really trust you. So how can we're challenged to think about how might we change not only our behaviours, but also the environments that we ask parents to come into. And as I said before, the policies and processes that actually dictate how we have to work. So let's move on now to the enablers of engaging families. Evangelo talks about the importance, as I said before, of considering the physical thresholds that continue to keep services from engaging hard-to-reach families. And Flea talks about the fact that we need to challenge ourselves to stop thinking about the hard-to-reach family, but rather consider what is it that we do that makes us hard to access. So how can we flip those deficits that we sometimes have about families on their head and actually ask ourselves the question, what can we do about it? What do we need to change? I remember one of the participants in my research who was working as a parent facilitator and running a parenting program. After a couple of years of training, she's now a facilitator, being supervised by a practitioner. And she said to me, I get it. What we're doing is we're working with and through parents, not to and for them. So this participant actually highlighted or identified for herself that, yes, this is actually about power. It is about sharing power and holding hands and walking alongside and celebrating together rather than actually prescribing solutions. So let's go on to the enablers of engagement. Through my work with the child and family centres that I talked about before, and also through the research that I've been doing, I've come to understand that there is real benefit in us actually adopting a culture and a service belief or underlying principles that it's important for workers and parents to consider themselves together partners in practice. And that means that actually we're challenged to think about ourselves as co-learners alongside a parent. Again, think about power in relationships. For us to also challenge ourselves not to make assumptions that we all know the rules of play. That is, how do I know that my colleagues that I'm working with in this new service I've just moved into, that we actually know how to treat each other? How do we know what constitutes respectful practice? And the reason I ask that is that this is the type of conversation ultimately we'd be wanting to have with and negotiate around in working with a community of parents who previously have viewed us with suspicion. Why would we want to have these types of conversations? Because I've come to understand that it's not safe to assume that we all know what respect means and that we're going to apply the same definition. So let's consider for a moment that we actually take the stuff that in the past we have assumed and make it explicit, put it out on the table, look at it like a jigsaw puzzle, toss it around, negotiate, argue about it, and come to a shared understanding. We need to be flexible. Our services and our practice needs to be flexible in order to adapt and change to the varying needs of families that we encounter. I said taking time before, and I hope that doesn't sound patronising in any way, because I understand that many of you work to the bone, working long hours, and trying the best you can. But we actually, if as a sector across the nation, if we truly want our governments to take this seriously, we need to let them know clearly that relationships with parents takes time. And it can't just be through a 3-second encounter as parents sign in and sign out their children. Reflection on practice. How can I actually model in my encounters with my colleagues and with parents and with children a reflectiveness in regards to how are we going in our relationship? I wonder what else we could be doing together. What have I learnt? What have I encountered? In demonstrating reflective behaviours, what we can see, or what you probably won't see if you're always practicing from the childcare centre or the school, but what we know is that when we model behaviours like reflectiveness, it plays out back in the home environment. So how can we model in our encounters with parents a wondering about things, a reflectiveness that actually will be taken to other environments and played out with their children or in front of their partners. Exploring and achieving a shared understanding. How do we make sure that every step of the way that we're speaking the same language? And Penny spoke to that briefly before. I don't know how many times I've been in meetings where big words have been thrown around, and I've wondered, really, do we all understand what collaboration means, or partnership, or sustainability? You try it one day. Stop a meeting and say, can we actually just check that we all understand what that means? I can almost guarantee you'll come up with a number of different definitions. We need inspirational leadership that allows an enabling culture, a culture of practice. We need to actually push ourselves to be innovators in our leadership rather than risk-averse managers. And importantly, if we want to engage families who previously have chosen to give you and I the wide berth, there is a lot to be said for deformalising not only our service environments but also our behaviours and how we actually approach our work. How do we take away all the things that communicate to families that actually I'm more powerful than you? I don't really trust you that much. And even if we don't mean to send that message, there's things that we are forced to do in our work that actually do send those subtle messages time and again. A wonderful example is we were able to negotiate in the design of child and family centres in Tasmania for parents to walk straight into a kitchen rather than a reception desk where they sit and wait. And that does wonders for building the confidence of parents to actually walk in the door and help themselves to a cup of soup and sit down and meet other parents. So, engagement of parents from how I'm talking, hopefully you understand now, is actually a culture of practice. It's not something we do in the process towards understanding what the community needs. It's not a tokenistic consultation mechanism. It is actually something that parents and other workers will see in our behaviours and in the service structure. I'm coming to think about now the soft edges of services that enable relationships to be repaired, relationships that were previously severed by the behaviour of practitioners, not you or I necessarily, but people like you or I, and we carry the reputation of that. So how might we actually challenge those perceptions that parents have about our sharpness, about our inability to actually meet them face to face, and start to work in a way that helps the parent understand we're going to do things differently this time round. Importantly, also within this concept of engagement is the notion of reciprocal benefit. Reciprocity is a big word, but it actually means how is there this two-way giving and taking? How do we receive from each other? How do I, as a practitioner, assist parents in my behaviour and how I hold myself in encounters with them and their children, that actually I continue to learn from them. They give to me, I give to them. Parents bring a swag of expertise and knowledge to the relationships we have with them. It's up to us to actually tap into that and let them know how much we value it. So from my perspective, the characteristics of an engaging service will include these on the slide in front of you. Informal and relaxed, as I said before, flexibility in operation, locally credible. Now, if families have struggled to trust us in the past, accessing your service and hopefully ultimately working within your service, well then that speaks volumes about you and your practice. They are much better ambassadors for your service in the eyes of other families who are staying away than you or I ever could be. And to be softly purposeful. I'm not talking about fluffy, but actually how might we be purposeful in our relationship but in a soft way, not in a sharp way that dictates terms, that lets people constantly know that we're more important, but rather how might we do it in a way that is care-filled, reflects partnership, and provides for parents, ultimately, if possible, learning and activity pathways beyond the service. And the engaging worker. Now, that's a question you could take back to your peers in a staff meeting to ask, what are the characteristics of an engaging worker? Perhaps you can call on these slides later and look at what I think, but perhaps start off by having that conversation with a couple of colleagues at some point and see what you come up with. Finally, my research is kind of culminating the crescendo, the drum roll, in this notion of system humility. If we truly are to reverse the tide and work in respectful partnership with parents who previously have struggled to access our system because there is a child, requires you and I and everyone else at the local area level who works in the early childhood service system to negotiate alongside parents, parents who previously have been suspicious of us, what actually would be required in the way that we behave together and in the way we provide services in order to reflect humility and respect. So how might we assist individuals to move from being suspicious to trusting? There's another thing that you could ask yourself. If I've struggled in the past with someone that I just haven't trusted, what would it take for me to actually change my perception of them? Well, the same answer you have there will be in how will be reflected in how we need to behave as early childhood professionals. Essentially, we just need to really relearn how to do relationships. We need to be very careful not to be get to the point where we're actually complacent in regards to we know what's best and we do this very well. I know that many of us do. All of us perhaps here work very well and do the best we can, but let's be very, very careful not to fall into complacency. We need to constantly reflect on and question what else, how else might I behave in order to make things possible for parents who've struggled to engage with the system. I think given the time left, I might stop there if that's okay by you, and you can access these slides later on. You there, Janelle?
Yes, thanks for that, Paul. We'll welcome everybody back on screen now if we can, because it's been a great opportunity for us to be challenged by some of the things that both Penny and Paul have given us, and it's been great actually to see the comments in the chat box as well. So before we get some final thoughts from both Penny and Paul, I thought we might just have a brief look at that original question that we posed right at the beginning, which was, what percentage of parents do you think have a strong partnership with your early childhood education and care service or school, and how do you know? And we're really looking at people around about that 30 to 50%. We've had some people saying 25%, some people saying 75%, but generally around that 30 to 50%. And some of the comments have sort of been around that it's the foot traffic through the door, so that they know that they've got some really good relationships, they've got people coming, there's positive feedback from parents and carers, open communication. And we've had some really interesting comments. There was one here from Rebecca that partnership begins at the front door on the first contact, and we need to ensure encouraging and respectful relationships. There's also been a couple of comments about really respecting parents, because not all parents want the same level of partnership. So I think that some of the things, Paul, that you've been talking about, and Penny, have kind of really highlighted being respectful and open to where parents are at, but also really looking at that percentage of parents that are really disengaged. I guess in the time that we've got left, it would be really good to hear from you, Paul, if there's any final thoughts. This is a reminder to everybody that you will get the notes and you will get a certificate, but I'm just wondering, Paul, if there's something that you'd like to briefly sum up, either if it's from the chat or what you've said, before I hand over to Penny and before we close off.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. There's just a couple of closing comments. One is to remember, I think it was Mary Gordon from the Roots of Empathy in Canada who came here probably 12 years ago and blew us all away. And she said, remember that every moment you spend with a baby or a young child creates a ripple that lasts a lifetime. And we create those ripples every day for a child. And the other message for me is actually, regardless of the system restraints and the policy restraints and being time poor and all those other things that we can blame on not working in an engaging way, the most powerful thing you and I can do is to work in a way that actually communicates respect, trust, empathy, and authenticity. Thanks.
Glenda, I think you have your phone muted.
Penny, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Yes, I agree completely with what Paul's been saying. And I think the thing I'd just like to finish by saying is that I think that when we behave in respectful ways with parents and are warm and interactive in our support, then what we're doing is filling their emotional buckets. I like that sort of term that someone used in one of our blogs. And if the parents' emotional buckets are full, they have much more to give children. And so the children benefit. And so we all benefit from that kind of relationship. And so on the screen there, you can see there's a blue box on the left, and these will be on the PowerPoint that you receive later, a copy of the PowerPoint. And the blue one, if you click on that connection there, that will take you through to the professional learning for component 3 in KidsMatter, and you'll see the videos and the topics and all the resources and things that you can work with there. And on the right-hand side, the yellow shape there, you'll see a copy of the cover of an e-book called Working with Parents and Carers, in which a lot of the things we've been talking about are explored. And that e-book can be either read on screen or you can print it out. And then below that, you'll see some connections you can make to officially get started with KidsMatter if you're not already part of our family. Thanks, Glenda.
Thanks, Penny and Paul, for those final thoughts. The ripple effect and emotional buckets are really good words that will certainly stick in my mind from today's webinar as well. We just want to remind you that connecting with KidsMatter is fun and a great way to stay informed about all things related to children's mental health and wellbeing. We'd love you to stay in contact with us, and so that you can access Facebook, you can email us, the Shared Thinking blog, or join us on Twitter. Just before Paul, Penny and I head off, we'd just like to remind you that to stay online and fill in the feedback form, which is coming up very soon. You'll receive a certificate if you've registered to this live webinar, and if you're attending as a group, on the feedback form, please list all the names of the people attending with you so that they'll also receive a certificate. And as you've been reminded, you'll receive information through our Shared Thinking blog with a list of references plus this webinar today. So I just really want to thank you, and on behalf of Paul and Penny and Janelle, who's been doing a great job with answering your questions in the chat. It's been a delight to be with you, and please look out for our upcoming webinars as well. So thanks everybody. Stay online and fill in that feedback form. Thanks very much. Bye-bye for now.
Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Just a friendly reminder, we'll be leaving the webinar open for another 10 minutes for you to fill in the form. Once you've answered the question, please scroll down and press the submit button. Thank you.